So in the last video, we looked at how to add a basic PvP setup where your players have health, and if they get hit by gunfire, they take damage and then they can die. And then we show that subsequent dying animation, although it was a little buggy, and then of course the subsequent death that happens after that. So this video, we're going to look at what happens next. We're going to allow our players to be able to respawn back into the game. I'm going to choose a random respawn location and then just kind of drop them back in. Just like how our players drop in randomly now, we're just going to do the same thing and just pick some random location. And then they'll just jump right back into the gameplay. So let's go back to our hit function. And if you haven't watched the last video, I highly recommend it. It'll make a lot more sense. In this death cleanup function here, we're going to expand it a little bit. Now, I don't know if you remember at the last video where I was jumping around and it looked like I just jumped and I was standing on the player while he was dead, but I was like 3 feet above him. That was this collision shape thing problem where he was actually standing on the collision shape because it was still pointing up and down where the player was flat. So what we're going to do to fix that problem is set it to disabled. So we're going to set this to disabled. Whoop, I can't spell true today at all. And again, this is on our server side. So we're going to have to disable this on both the server and on the client. It's probably not terribly important on the server. Well, I guess it would be because that's where our location tracking authority is. So yeah, let's go ahead and disable it on the server, and then we're going to also disable it on the clients because I don't believe that this disability here is actually carried through to the client. So we're going to have to manually do that. So let's just go ahead and set that there, and that should lay down the player's collision shape. You may want to handle this differently. This actually disables it completely. You may want to just lay it down like I just said. And so that way you can still kind of see his body laying off the ground. My guy's kind of sink into the ground right now because he kind of loses the collision shape. So I'm going to let you play with that side of things for your game. Oh, and I want to add a variable here called able to respawn. And we're going to go ahead and track this variable because I don't want you to be able to respawn immediately. So this is kind of a server checks and balances that gives the server the authority to deny any outside early requests to respawn. So let's add that here. And while we're at it, let's also add another variable, remaining respawn time, and that's just going to handle the timer that displays while the player's waiting to respond. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. And before we move on, before I forget, because that's one of those things we always do, let's go ahead and add these two because we want to be able to synchronize those. Okay, so able to respond will be synchronized because we need to be able to access that on our client, but since it's server authority, we're gonna make sure that it's set on the server only, and the same thing with the remaining respawn time because we're gonna leverage those variables on the server authority side so we don't have any problems with that. Okay, and still while we're up here, I'm gonna add one more thing, but let's go over to our player tree and let's add a new node, and we're gonna make this just a basic node, and we're gonna call it respawn manager. And within that respawn manager, I'm gonna add a timer to kind of organize it. And again, you can probably organize this however you want. And again, while we're over here, I'm just going to go ahead and add a control to handle the display of the death messages or the game over messages and the respawn buttons and that sort of thing. So let's add a button and a label, and we'll just add another label. Okay, so I got my 2D interface set up here. I created a control called respawn display and added a label that indicates you're dead, and also a placeholder for where we're going to put the respawn time remaining. So that's where that's going to go. And then of course a respawn button that I've left over there. Let's just go ahead and hit respawn, and we're just going to move him right here. Add my theme and do a quick theme override on just the font size. All right, and then let me just try to center it. I think center's right about there. Okay, so we've got our respawn display and our you are dead label, and also we've got our respawn time remaining. So you can't see it because it's hidden behind the button, but it's going to hold wherever the respawn timer is. So I just put a placeholder there so I can see it. And of course, our respawn button that will show up once the respawn timer is complete. So that means we're going to toggle the visibility because we don't want that to show up. And we're also going to toggle the visibility on the whole thing. So what's going to remain visible is the you are dead label and the respawn timer, because those are always going to show up once this respawn display is shown. So we'll go ahead and close that, or make that, not close it, but make it invisible. And also I moved the pause and quit buttons to the center and just made the pause button a little bigger. And those are also going to be hidden. And let me make sure actually that the pause button doesn't overtake yeah, there's a bug in my current games. If you guys have downloaded anything, just the pause label was over covering the quit button there. So you just need to adjust it so it doesn't cover the quit button. So we'll go ahead and hide that. And another thing I did was the crosshair. I went and decided, after there's a crosshair behind there, you can't see it, but I decided that I'm not going to always show it, because I saw that it was showing when in like cases where you didn't want to show it. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly where it was showing up, but there's also like an authority issue with making this visible or not when the player was respawning. So for now, I just default that to not show, and we'll manually show that, and I guess the rest of these things as needed. So we can go ahead and move on from there. Let's go back to our script, and let's grab a reference to that respawn manager that we just created a second ago. Oh, and if you're new and you're watching this, or I guess if you're experienced in watching this, you're probably like, why isn't he being consistent with his naming convention? Yeah, I'm all over the place on this. I'm trying to do a better job with it. And like with things that are only specific to the class that shouldn't be accessed outside, I think you're supposed to put an underscore. So that means it's local to this class, and you shouldn't be grabbing this respawn manager outside of the player reference here. So please bear with me. I probably should have made this underscore too as well. But I haven't done that. And as you can see here, I did pretty bad. Like, I think all of these should be underscore if you're going to follow correct naming conventions. And if you're wondering, there's a great link and article written about this from Godot itself. So please go check that out and not necessarily follow what I'm doing. Okay, so if we go back to our death cleanup, what's happening here is once the player is dead, we need to kick off the respawn timer that we just created over here. Actually, let me rename it. And let's grab a reference to that right here, and we're just going to start it. So once the player dies, we call death cleanup, and it sets our animations, it disables our collision shape, and then we make this able to respond variable to false, which I'll show you where I'm going to use that in a second. And then we go ahead and kick off the respawn timer. And at that point, the respawn timer text in the screen should start showing up. And before I move on, let's just look at how to do that really quick. Okay, let's bounce up to the process function. Actually, we don't have a process function yet, so let's go ahead and I'm actually disabling it on the client, but we need to use it. So let's create our process function. We're going to show the text being counted down, but we don't really care about it happening on the server. Like, we don't want to display the text on the server or run that logic on the server. We do want the countdown variable to be counting down on the server, and we're going to use it on the client. So I have a check that I like to use when it's basically right here when you're not on server, or if you're in local host mode, which for my game setup, local host means you're in host mode and the client is both server and client, which is host mode. So this is a good check for that. I've found good results with using this check. So if we're on a client in host mode, we're going to be able to run that here. So if we're not on a server, like we're on a true client, or if we're in local host mode, as I just described, we're going to go ahead and add a couple checks here. Or is the player not alive? And we're going to use that able to respawn call here, I should say, and not able to respawn. So while the player is dead and while they're not able to respond, we're going to show that respawn message. So let's grab our respawn time remaining node, and we're going to build a text string, and we're going to set it to that label, and we're going to need to update this remaining respawn time. But before we do that, I got one more check. So if we are on the server, we're going to actually update that remaining respawn time. So that's server authority. And we're going to use our respawn manager that we just created a reference to at the top of the class. And we're going to call a function called respawn time left. Okay, so there's a couple things that we don't have yet. We don't have a respawn manager script at all, so we need to create that. And then once we have that, we'll be able to correctly update this remaining respawn time. So I think the next thing we can do is let's try to build out the respawn manager script. So I'm going to click on there, and I'm going to create a script. Stick it in the scripts folder, respawn manager. Sounds good. So I don't think we'll need any of these functions. So let's create that. What did I call it? Respawn time left. So let's create that. Grab a reference to our respawn timer, stick it there, time left, and then we're gonna mod 60 so that we can get seconds. So this should be a really quick and easy way to get us seconds. I'm only gonna count down for 5 seconds. And while I said that, let's click on our respawn timer, and you can see here, wait time, I'm gonna move it to 5 seconds. So once we call this start, which is down here, once you call the timer to start, it's gonna count down for 5 seconds. And then when it's finished, while we have the other script open, let's go ahead and create the function that it's gonna call when it's done. Okay, so let's wire up this function on the timeout signal. Oops, we gotta select our new respawn manager, pick that. Oh, it's erroring out because I don't have, so I'm creating a reference to be able to spawn to call that true. So what I'm doing here is in this respawn timer complete, which we're gonna wire up to this timeout function in just a sec, I'm gonna set that able to respond back to true so that it kills that message because our timer is done. And at that point, we're gonna show our button. But first, let's create a reference to our player object. Okay, so now that we have a reference to our player object, we can go ahead and wire up this timeout function. So let me select the respawn manager. I'm gonna pick respawn timer completed, connected, great. So now when that respawn timer is finished, it's gonna call back to this function, and then we're gonna set that able to respond to true, and that's gonna subsequently kick off some events that will help us. We'll put that show button logic here in just a second. So if we go back to our player script, we've kicked off our timer now. We're not able to respond. Our process function, which we now have, is going to be updating the countdown timer. And of course, our text will be updated here by calling to the respawn time left function in our respawn manager. So now what we need to do is actually kick off some other logic. So let's go back to our death cleanup function call within our hit function. So right here, right after we do all this cleanup on the death thing, I also want to kick off a call so that we show the buttons and all this text that we need to display while the player is waiting to respawn. So we're gonna make another call that does that, and we're gonna call it kickoff respawn on client. So that's gonna be an RPC that we call down to the client from our server side right after we call the death cleanup. So this is gonna kick off on the server, and then we wanna make a call to that client so that it shows the respawn text that, you know, you are dead, and then the button, and then also makes the respawn timer start counting down. And it won't show the button right away, because it's not going to show the button until that respawn timer is complete, but it'll get all those things ready. So back over in the respawn manager, we need to create an RPC. Okay, so we're going to pass in the player that died. So if we go back to that player, you can see I passed in the player that died because this is going to be called on all clients, right? So this is going to be called on all clients. So if you look here, the server is going to call, and we're going to be able to call local because the server can be acting in host mode. And so both clients are going to get a message of who died, right? Because we need to be able to update things respective to whatever client received this message. Now, we don't want to kill both clients if only one guy died, or we don't want to show those respawn messages. We only want to show the respawn messages on the client that actually died. So we're going to pass in the player that died ID, and I just printed out here so that we know on which peer the message is. You know, if you want to debug that, that's a nice way to debug which peer is getting that message. We're going to also disable the collision shape, and that's going to disable that collision shape on both clients. So if player one's dead now, both player one and player two, the guy who killed him, will have that player one shape respectively disabled so that you won't be able to like bounce or jump on top of this imaginary collision shape there. So if the player that died is the current client that we're on, then we need to go ahead and set up the respawn display to show that respawn timer countdown. Here we're going to show that the crosshair container is hidden. We're going to also hide the button just to make sure it's not visible. And then we're going to show the remaining time or time remaining label and then display the whole thing. So I'm basically setting it up and then at the end just flicking the whole thing on. And then what I'm doing here is I don't want to capture the mouse anymore. The way that my game is set up, if you hit escape, it basically pauses the game and it lets your mouse, you'll be able to see it again. And then once you hit escape, it captures it again. I don't want it to be captured. So this allows you to be able to click on buttons And while we're on this crosshair container thing, we need to do one more thing in the player input script. When we are on a client, we need to be able to show the crosshairs. So instead of hi, let's just mark that show. And this is going to be, I believe this is client authority, and this is why I had to do this crosshairs container here. I'm not 100% sure. I didn't have time to debug why this was happening. It was actually a little confusing why I couldn't set this elsewhere. But so this is definitely going to be set on a client. As you can see, I'm doing client things here, only client side things here where I'm capturing the mouse. So we're going to show the crosshairs there once the player has been set up. And again, this is going to handle all the player inputs. This is where we handle like mouse clicking and shooting and that sort of thing, or any kind of input. So we're going to show the crosshairs when that player jumps into the game or falls down in the game. And then when they die, we're just going to hide it. And we also need to make one quick change to my pause logic. You can probably skip this part if you're not using my pause logic, but if you look where I'm pausing the game right around here, pause or unpausing the game, I should say. If you're dead and you're lying there and the respawn timer is coming up and you pause the game, it's going to let your mouse run freely like this, right? You'll see your cursor running around the screen. But if you click escape again, it's going to actually capture that mouse. And if you're dead, we don't want it to be able to do that. We still want you to be able to pause and unpause without losing access to click that respawn button. And I might touch on that again later if I remember to cover it. But so right here, we just need to make a check to make sure that you're alive. Right, so if the player is alive, that means we don't have to worry about losing access to the mouse to click that respawn button, and we can go ahead and recapture the mouse and they'll go back right into the game. So that's a quick thing. You don't really necessarily have to do that. It's just something, if you've been following along and using my game, you may want to add that. So where we're at right now is we're showing our you are dead, here's the respawn timer. And once that timer is complete, remember back here we're going to show buttons. So it's basically going to do nothing. It's going to be waiting for that respawn timer, and you're just going to be sitting there not being able to do anything. But once it is finished, we want to be able to show the respawn button so we can get you back into the game. So we're going to make a call to this RPC called show respawn button. So let's go ahead and create that. All right, so that means we're going to kill the text and the respawn timer to clear it out. And we're going to hide the respawn timer, and then we're actually going to show the button because we're no longer counting down. You are ready to respawn, and that button will be shown on the screen. So once you click that button, though, we need to handle what happens once you click it. So let's create a signal to handle the button click. So we're going to go ahead and recapture the mouse because you're back in the gameplay. We're going to hide that whole respawn display. We don't need to see that anymore. And then we need to show our crosshairs again so that you can aim correctly. So the next thing we need to do is be able to tell the server, hey, we clicked on the respawn button, put us back in the game, and kick off that respawn logic. Let's create our RPC, respawn player. Oh, whoops, don't need that. All right, so our respawn button is clicked. Oh, we actually need to wire that up. So let me do that really quick before we forget. Wiring, so button pressed, click our respawn manager, pick, and respawn player button clicked. Excellent, okay. So when you click on the respawn button, we hide everything that we don't need to show anymore, and then we make a call back to the server. So then we're gonna check, is the player actually able to respond? So this is a little bit of a fail-safe to make sure that the server has authority over when the player can respond or not. So respawn or not, because we don't want them to be able to respond early from some malicious request. So that able to respond is determined earlier, like we talked about, once the timer is done, and that authority is on the server. So once they're able to respond, we go ahead and make the collision shape re-enabled, and we pick a random location. Just, you can do whatever you want to respawn them. And I set the player to that position. I reset their health and mark them back alive. So they are back in the game. I would probably move all this into maybe a player service. Again, this has a lot of room for improvements and refactoring. It's really just to get a demonstration of the basics on how to put this together. You can even have a loading or splash screen when they die if you want, and just load a different scene from this. But for now, I'm just keeping it really simple. I'm going to set their position. I'm not going to remove them from the game. I'm just going to teleport them. And you're basically not going to see them because they're going to be teleporting down from above, I think 10 meters. And then we'll reset their health and then just mark them back alive. Okay, and if I've got everything wired up correctly, I think we're ready for a demo. So let's just see. Oh, I've got 3 instances running, and I never got a chance to fix my death animation, so it's still gonna look funky. So forgive me for that. So let's come over here and let's go ahead and try to shoot. So I'm shooting nothing. Okay, let's aim over the player. Let me just jump over here. I'm snuck up behind him. We'll go ahead and shoot him. Okay, his hit points are dropping quick. So now he should die. Look at that. You are dead. Respawn in 3, 2, 1, 0. And then we hide that message and we show that respawn button. Oh, there's the other player just aiming up at the air. So let's go ahead and hit respawn, and he just drops back in. Perfect. Look at that. And if I go back over to that other client again, I should be able to shoot him, and it'll say that he should be down to, what is it, 70 health? Perfect. Right down to 70 health. So that's exactly what we expect. So I think, oh, there's a respawn timer done that's getting spammed down here. I think we need to kill that respawn timer. It looks like it's just repeating over and over again. But anyways, so let me look into that in a second. I just want to make sure that it's working on both clients. Let me see if I can go over to the player 1 client, which is the host mode, guys. Go ahead and get him down to death. And now he's respawning. His death animation isn't working properly. I just noticed. So something's a little fishy there. Let me think about it for a second.
A few moments later.
Okay, so after a quick debug detour, I noticed that the player, when he died, the timer was still going, and I wasn't sure why, and it was like continuously running wherever this timer complete kept running over and over again. And then it dawned on me, okay, over in the respawn timer, you need to make sure that you hit 1 shot. Now you can keep repeating it if your game calls for that. If you need a respawn or a timer for some other use case, feel free to do that. But over here, I just click 1 shot because I want it to be 1 and done so that I can manually restart it every time a player dies. So that was the fix for that. And then another thing I noticed is, like, once the player was dead, and let's say he was just laying on the ground there, if another person joined the game, like he wasn't in the game at all and he came in, he would actually see that player go through the death animation again. And that's what I was trying to avoid. And I touched on this in the last video, and I just had a feeling that it was going to break something, and it totally did. So in the last video, I just added, okay, after you kick off the transition to die, I just go ahead and set the current animation to death, which doesn't have a use case here, which just means once the player loads into the game, it should just show that death animation. Well, it wasn't doing that because it was getting called too quickly. Like, it was actually detecting this death animation, my animation loop. So it was applying like a null animation, which means he was just standing there. So he was dead, but if you had noticed, he was just kind of standing still. So I got rid of that. And really quick, what I did was I added this on animation finish. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is the best way to handle it, but I couldn't really think of a quick way to do this. So what I did was, over in the animation tree, I just created a signal callback to on animation finished, which just calls this function here. And I checked that, hey, if you have a dying backwards animation, go ahead and just change the animation to the death animation, and then it should show that correct animation once the player actually joins and sees somebody else dead. It's not going to walk him through that. It's not going to put him back through that whole dying animation or whatever. It's just going to show him dead. So again, this just says, is the current animation for this player dying backwards? And I mean, was the current animation that finished dying backwards? Well, if it was, then go ahead and set the current animation. That way you don't get your player into some weird animation state. And then that way, if somebody else joins and or spawns into the game, they're not going to see that silly animation there. So now that I got that fixed, let's do a full demo. I think we've got the whole PvP setup and respawn working. Let's get some clients up here, and I'll show you that example really quick of what I'm talking about. Start our host server. Let's pull out a rifle and have him come over here, and let's start another client. Drop in, and I'll pull out his pistol there and see if I can do damage. So yeah, I can take damage on him. And let's actually just go ahead and switch to rifle, and let's just blow him away really quick. Okay, so he's dead. And again, ignore the funny bounce animation. That's just a bug and a terrible Blender export. So instead of hitting respawn though, I want to show you what I'm talking about. So if I start this client, he should just drop right in, and not see. So he's dead. You didn't see him do that dumb bounce thing or whatever. So that worked correctly as expected. I don't think there's another bug there. I think we got it. And as you can see here, I can jump on him and the collision shape isn't getting in the way. It's been disabled. So I've kind of showed a couple things that we've done throughout the video where when the player dies, we just disable the collision shape so they're not going to be in our way anymore. So that's one way we did that. And let's go ahead and just try to kill off another guy really quick. And you can see the bounce animation in both screens, so that's working correctly. Or the death animation, I should say, the bouncy death. It's really rough when you're killed by these guns here. So we drop back in and you're good to go. And I can just shoot you now. And now you're dead. And you could see that they fall over in the respective screens. So I got 2 dead guys here. So let's go ahead and respawn them, do some quick testing. This guy's dead over there. Let's see if I can like show the other. It's hard to switch between the clients when you're all on the same machine. So I want to see if I can switch. Let's go ahead and yeah, here we go. Okay, so let me kill this guy and you should see that happen in real time. Boom, and now he's dead. And now this guy's walking around. This is working very well. I'm very excited how this is turning out. And so I've got basically a full blown start to finish game. I mean, there's a lot more work to it that we need to do. I need to add some, gunfire, muzzle flashes and some animations when you're hit. I need to fix this animation of this guy bouncing around. And but game dev is iterative, especially when you're working solo and using free animations provided out there by the community and by Adobe and wherever you're getting your animations. And if you guys are interested in seeing me finish up this demo and kind of building it out to completion, please subscribe and give this video a like. It really helps me stay motivated, and you're supporting the channel. And anyways, regardless, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.